Imagine a character, a fictional detective, just spun from ink and paper, who became so incredibly real that when his creator tried to kill him off, people actually mourned his passing in the streets.
Yeah,
How is that even possible?
it's an amazing story, isn't it?
That's the fascinating question at the heart of this deep dive. Drawing directly from the stack of sources you've shared, we're going to give you, well, a real shortcut.
Okay.
A shortcut to understanding not just a famous figure in literature, but, a cultural phenomenon that fundamentally shaped an entire genre and has captivated the global imagination for well over a century.
A huge impact.
Exactly. This isn't just about dusting off old books. It's about uncovering the secrets behind the birth of a legend, the remarkable genius that brought him to life, and the astonishing, enduring impact he continues to have today.
Hmm.
By the end of this, you'll have the essential insights, giving you a solid foundation to understand exactly why Sherlock Holmes remains so compelling, so present, even now.
Sounds like a great goal.
Our mission is clear. Dive into this rich material about Sherlock Holmes and pull out the most important, maybe even surprising, nuggets of knowledge about his creation, the complete body of his adventures, famously known as the Canon,
Right, the canon.
and the truly unprecedented scale of his global influence.
A lot to unpack there.
And joining me as our expert guide, ready to synthesize all this information and help us figure out the so what behind it all is, well, our expert.
It's always a pleasure to dig into material this rich. Sherlock Holmes is a figure who seems simple on the surface, but reveals incredible complexity and layers of influence once you start exploring.
Absolutely. So let's pull back the curtain on that famous address, 221B Baker Street, and really explore the legacy of arguably the greatest detective fiction has ever known.
Let's do it.
Let's start right at the very beginning. Who was the mind behind him, and where did this extraordinary character even come from?
Well, what's truly fascinating, according to the material you've provided, is that Sherlock Holmes wasn't just born solely from imagination. His creator, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who lived from 1859 to 1930, was first and foremost a medical doctor,
A doctor, okay.
and that practical scientific background was profoundly influential.
Right.
The sources really highlight a pivotal figure in Doyle's life, Dr. Joseph Bell.
Dr. Bell.
Yes, Bell was one of Doyle's professors during his time studying medicine at the University of Edinburgh. And this wasn't just any professor. Bell possessed an almost legendary ability.
Oh.
He could take one look at a patient and, through minute observation, deduce astonishing details about their life. He could tell if they were, say, a shoemaker by the specific calluses on their hands, deduce their recent travels from the type of mud on their boots,
Wow.
or even guess their profession based on the stains on their clothing or their regional accent. It was quite remarkable.
That sounds less like medicine and more like a real-life superpower of observation.
Exactly. It was this almost scientific approach to observation and deduction that captivated Doyle. He himself quoted Dr. Bell, emphasizing the critical difference between merely seeing something and truly observing it.
Seeing versus observing.
Precisely, noticing the details, understanding their significance, and drawing logical conclusions. This real-world, rational method, grounded in medical science and observation, was the direct, living prototype for the intellectual engine that would drive Sherlock Holmes.
So Doyle saw this in action.
He did. Doyle took that foundation and built a character upon it.
So he had the scientific method inspiration, but Holmes wasn't the very first detective character in literature, was he? The sources point to some important literary predecessors.
That's a key insight the material provides.
Right.
No, Holmes didn't appear out of nowhere. He definitely stands on the shoulders of earlier figures who explored the idea of solving mysteries through intellect.
Like who?
Well, the most significant is Edgar Allan Poe's C. Auguste Dupin. Dupin first appeared way back in 1841 in stories like The Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Poe, right. Better known for the macabre and gothic horror, usually.
Right, but he pretty much invented the modern detective story. Dupin was the prototype of the armchair detective who uses what Poe called ratiocination.
Ratiocination. Fancy word.
It is. Essentially, it means logical inference and reasoning to solve seemingly impossible crimes from a distance. He established the intellectual battleground where the detective's mind is the primary weapon.
Okay, so the intellectual side.
Then you have Émile Gaboriau from France with his character, Monsieur Lecoq. Lecoq added a layer of gritty realism.
How so?
His stories focused more on the procedural aspects of police work, systematic investigation, gathering clues, dealing with the criminal underworld. More boots on the ground, you could say.
Okay, so if Dupin was the pure brain, Lecoq brought the practical legwork and police procedure.
Precisely. And the real genius of Conan Doyle, as the sources make clear, was how he synthesized these elements. He took Poe's intellectual deduction, Gabordio's realistic methods, combined them with Dr. Bill's real-world observational science.
The seeing versus observing thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Filtered it through his own medical knowledge and added his unique literary imagination. Holmes isn't just a product of this tradition. The sources argue he's its absolute pinnacle.
So taking these earlier ideas and just elevating them.
To a level of complexity, personality, and sheer storytelling power that hadn't really been seen before.
Yeah. That perfect blend resulted in an incredible body of work that fans affectionately call the Canon. What exactly does that include, and how expensive is it?
Right, the canon. It's the official term for all the Sherlock Holmes stories written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself. It comprises 4 full-length novels and 56 short stories.
56 short stories plus 4 novels. That's 60 adventures.
60 distinct adventures, yes. Published over a span of exactly 40 years, from 1887 right through to 1927.
40 years, 60 distinct stories covering what feels like a whole lifetime of cases. That's a remarkable output.
It is, and the sources emphasize that this collection is really the bedrock of modern detective literature. Looking through them, you see the character and his world develop quite a bit.
Let's touch on those. Where does the journey begin?
It begins with the novels. A Study in Scarlet, published in 1887, is the absolute starting point. This is where Dr. John Watson, a recently wounded Army doctor, is searching for a place to live.
Our narrator.
Exactly. And he's introduced to this utterly unique individual, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, through a mutual friend. They decide to share rooms at that now iconic address, 221B Baker Street.
221B. Everyone knows it.
Right. The novel unfolds as Watson, the perfect narrator, observes Holmes applying his extraordinary methods to a bizarre murder case, giving us the very first glimpse of his powers.
And it's the start of the famous friendship, too.
It's not just a detective story, it's the origin story of one of literature's greatest friendships, absolutely.
Okay, what came next?
Then came The Sign of the Four in 1890. This case plunges them into a complex plot involving buried treasure, betrayal, and a secret pact formed years earlier in India.
Sounds intricate.
It is. And the sources note that this novel also offers some fascinating, perhaps darker insights into Holmes's character, including his use of cocaine.
Ah, yes, the 7% solution.
Right, as a stimulant when bored, which adds layers of complexity beyond just the brilliant mind.
Makes him more human, maybe. Flawed.
Perhaps. Then, maybe the most famous single story is the novel The Hound of the Baskervilles, published later in 1902.
Definitely heard of that one.
The sources universally hail this as a masterpiece, a perfect blend of gothic horror and rational mystery. It takes Holmes and Watson to the bleak, atmospheric moors of Dartmoor.
Spooky setting.
Very. Where a noble family is seemingly haunted by a terrifying supernatural hound. The brilliance lies in how Holmes must cut through layers of superstition and fear to uncover the very rational human truth behind the terrifying legend.
Logic versus the supernatural.
Exactly. It's a triumph of atmosphere and suspense.
And the last novel.
Finally, The Valley of Fear in 1915 is structured in 2 distinct parts. The first part deals with a brutal murder in a seemingly peaceful English country manor,
The classic setup.
which then connects chillingly to the operations of a ruthless secret society or gang in America. This novel is significant because it provides more detailed background and reveals the vast, complex network controlled by Holmes's ultimate nemesis,
Professor Moriarty.
the Napoleon of crime himself.
So those 4 novels really anchor the canon, setting the stage and providing some major narrative arcs. What about the 56 short stories? They must cover an even wider range of cases.
They absolutely do, and some of the short stories contain cases and characters that are arguably even more famous than the novels. They were collected into 5 volumes.
5 volumes. Any highlights?
Well, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, published in 1892, is particularly notable for introducing Irene Adler in A Scandal in Bohemia.
Irene Adler. The woman.
That's the one. The sources highlight that she's the only character Holmes ever expressed genuine admiration for, famously referring to her as the woman because she was the one person who ever truly outmaneuvered him.
Quite a distinction. What else?
Then came the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes in 1894. This volume contained what was intended to be the shocking finale, the final problem.
The finale? But he came back.
Right. Doyle, by this point, had perhaps grown weary of the character and decided to write his definitive ending. He depicted Holmes locked in a fatal struggle with Professor Moriarty at the Reichenbach Falls in Switzerland,
The famous falls.
with both men seemingly plunging to their deaths.
But we know that wasn't the end. He obviously came back. What was the story there and what prompted the return?
Well, the sources confirm the legend. The public reaction to Holmes's apparent death was absolutely immense. People were genuinely shocked. Many apparently wore black armbands as a sign of mourning.
Seriously, mourning a fictional character.
Seriously, the demand for his return was overwhelming. This public pressure eventually led Doyle to revive the character.
Wow. Okay, so how did he bring him back?
He did so in 1905 with the collection The Return of Sherlock Holmes. The very first story in that volume, The Adventure of the Empty House, provides the explanation. Holmes reveals that he actually faked his death at the Reichenbach Falls,
Ah, the classic fake out.
survived the fall, somehow, and then spent years in hiding from Moriarty's remaining network before finally feeling safe enough to return to London and Watson.
A dramatic return.
Very. Later collections, like his last Bow in 1917, contain stories from Holmes's later career and even retirement. The title story sees him return to action one last time, on the eve of World War I, using his skills to defeat a German spy.
Bringing him right up to modern history almost.
Almost. And the final collection, The Case Book of Sherlock Holmes, published in 1927, represents Doyle's true farewell to the character.
It's quite remarkable how the canon, across those 60 stories, effectively maps out the entire active life of this character, from his first case with Watson right through to his final bow. It gives him a sense of a lived life, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And that definitely contributes to his feeling of reality for readers, I think.
Okay, so we've explored where he came from and cataloged the vast body of his work. But looking at the sources, it's clear this isn't just confined to the page.
Not at all.
How huge is the Sherlock Holmes phenomenon globally? What do the numbers tell us about his fame beyond being a literary character?
The sheer scale of Holmes's global impact is one of the most striking insights from the material. While getting precise, perfectly verified numbers across a century is difficult, estimates widely cited suggest the Sherlock Holmes books have sold hundreds of millions of copies worldwide.
Hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
That's a figure you usually associate with just a handful of authors or series in history.
Exactly. The sources highlight that while individual authors might have higher total book sales for multiple characters or series, for the complete collection of adventures centered on a single character, the commercial success of the canon is considered virtually unprecedented in publishing history.
Unprecedented for one character.
Right. That speaks to a level of consistent, enduring appeal across generations.
And beyond book sales.
Another powerful indicator of his truly universal appeal is translation. These stories have been translated into well over 100 different languages.
Over 100 languages, wow.
Think about the cultures all over the world, with vastly different histories and literary traditions, are engaging with the same core stories.
Why do you think that is? What makes him translate so well?
The sources suggest this is because the themes resonate globally. You know, the triumph of intellect over brute force, the fundamental human desire for justice, the simple pleasure of unraveling a complex puzzle,
And the friendship.
and the enduring power of friendship, absolutely. These things cross cultural boundaries.
Okay, so huge sales, massive translation. What about other media? Film.tv.
And then you step off the page and into other media. The sources point to a remarkable statistic. According to the Guinness World Records, Sherlock Holmes is the most portrayed literary human character in film and television history.
The most portrayed human character. More than Hamlet. More than Dracula.
Apparently so. For a literary human character, we're not just talking dozens, we're talking hundreds of different actors stepping into those famous shoes.
Hundreds.
Hundreds. Countless adaptations in movies, TV series, plays, radio dramas, comics, games. The list just goes on and on.
Hundreds of actors playing the same role. That's an insane level of penetration into popular culture. Why? Why do you think directors and actors keep returning to this character generation after generation, portraying him in so many different ways?
That's a crucial point the sources explore. It's precisely because the character, at his core, is incredibly robust and adaptable.
Robust and adaptable.
You can see this spectrum in the adaptations, from the classic, almost reverent portrayal by Basil Rathbone in the mid-20th century.
The iconic look for many.
Definitely. To Jeremy Brest's performance, often cited as the most faithful to the original stories, all the way to modern reinventions like Robert Downey Jr.'s more action-oriented dynamic take.
The action hero Holmes.
Right. Or Benedict Cumberbatch's portrayal of a high-functioning, socially awkward genius in a contemporary setting.
Very different takes.
Hugely different. But the material suggests that the fundamental DNA Doyle created the unparalleled intellect. The reliance on logic and observation, the relationship with Watson, the battle against crime, and often a complex villain is so strong that it allows for diverse interpretations without losing the essence of the character.
So the core holds up, no matter the setting or style.
It seems so. Each generation finds their Holmes, making him feel current and relevant, whether he's solving crimes in foggy Victorian London or navigating the complexities of the 21st century.
That adaptability, that core strength, is absolutely key to his longevity and global reach. And speaking of reaching readers worldwide, the sources you've provided give us a specific, fascinating look at Holmes's journey in Turkey.
Ah, yes, the Turkish connection.
How did he arrive there, and what's unique about his status and availability for Turkish readers?
Well, Holmes arrived quite early in Turkey, even back in the late Ottoman period, and found a very receptive audience. He became, and remains, incredibly popular there.
Okay.
But as the sources detail, one of the most unique aspects of his presence in Turkey, and indeed many other countries, relates directly to copyright law.
Copyright. How does that come into it?
Well, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle passed away in 1930. Under international copyright conventions, and specifically Turkish law, as noted in the sources, copyright protection generally extends for 70 years after the author's death.
70 years post-mortem. Okay.
Which means that as of January 1st, 2001, the entire body of work by Conan Doyle, including all 60 Sherlock Holmes stories in the canon, officially entered the public domain in Turkey.
Public domain. Okay, for listeners who might not be familiar with the term, what does that practically mean for the books and readers in Turkey?
It means the end of any single entity having exclusive rights to publish the works. Because the copyright has expired, anyone is legally free to publish the Sherlock Holmes stories.
Anyone, so multiple publishers.
Exactly. The sources indicate that this led to an explosion of editions in Turkey. Dozens of different publishing houses now print and sell the canon.
Dozens.
Yeah. The material mentions well-known examples like Japan Culture Yayınları, Everest, Itaki, and Martud, but there are many, many more smaller publishers also producing editions.
So, lots of competition. What does that do for readers?
This fierce competition in the public domain has created an enormous variety of options for the reader. Publishers differentiate themselves through different translations, different cover designs, different paper quality, different editorial approaches.
So you can get fancy editions, cheap editions.
Pretty much. Some offer scholarly introductions, others prioritize accessibility. This widespread availability, fueled by the public domain status, is a significant factor in his continued visibility and popularity across different segments of the reading public in Turkey.
And translations, are they all available?
The sources confirm that because of this popularity and the public domain status, not only have all 4 novels and all 56 short stories been translated into Turkish, but crucially, they have been translated multiple times.
Multiple times? By different people?
Yes, by different translators over the decades, working for these different publishers.
Multiple translations from multiple publishers. That must lead to a very different reading landscape than in a country where a single publisher might hold rights, or where translations are more centrally managed. Does that affect the reader's experience?
It absolutely does, and the sources caution about this. Because there's no longer a single gatekeeper ensuring quality, the fidelity and style of the translations can vary dramatically.
So quality control is an issue.
It can be. Some publishers invest in meticulous, high-quality translations that strive to capture the nuances of Doyle's language and the Victorian-era setting. Others might opt for more simplified language, abridged versions, or translations done, let's say, less carefully.
So buyer beware, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. The material advises that a reader in Turkey needs to choose their edition carefully, perhaps looking at the translator or publisher's reputation, as the quality of the translation will significantly impact their enjoyment and understanding of the stories.
That makes sense.
It also makes compiling a complete, definitive historical list of every single Turkish translation that has ever existed incredibly challenging.
I can imagine.
Holmes has been read there since the late 19th century through various printings and serializations, and the sheer volume of different editions published since entering the public domain in 2001 makes a comprehensive bibliography a daunting task.
It's a fascinating illustration of how legal status can shape literary accessibility and translation history, isn't it?
It really is a
Yeah.
very specific outcome of copyright law.
It really is incredible to see how a global phenomenon plays out so distinctly in a specific place like Turkey, influenced by factors like copyright law.
Absolutely.
So there you have it, the incredible journey of Sherlock Holmes. From the sharp observations of a doctor that inspired a character, through 60 iconic adventures that cemented the foundations of a genre, to his unprecedented global reach, and even the unique way his stories are published and consumed in places like Turkey. He truly is an absolute touchstone for detective fiction and popular culture.
No question. The material consistently underscores that unique blend of scientific logic applied to mystery, the sheer depth and variety within the canon, and that remarkable ongoing global presence.
And why do you think he still resonates so much?
Holmes resonates because he taps into fundamental human interests. The power of intellect, the dynamics of friendship between two very different men, and the timeless quest for truth and order in what often feels like a chaotic world.
Yeah, that search for order.
I think so.
And as the sources make clear, understanding Sherlock Holmes isn't just about knowing trivia about a fictional character. It's understanding the very roots of the detective genre, appreciating the power of keen observation in solving puzzles.
Seeing versus observing, again.
Right. And engaging with a character who, despite being entirely fictional, has felt strangely powerfully real to millions across generations and cultures.
He feels incredibly real. And while this deep dive, based on the material you've provided, has given us an essential overview, the sources hint that the true adventure, the deepest dive possible, lies in examining each of those 60 stories individually.
Oh, going case by case.
Putting them under the microscope one by one to see what makes them tick.
Oh.
That could be fascinating.
Exactly. And that sounds like the perfect kind of exploration for future deep dives, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Okay.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder, building on everything we've discussed today.
Okay, leave us with something.
If a character, brought into existence purely through ink and paper, can achieve this level of reality, this enduring fame, and become this deeply beloved by millions across the entire planet, what does that fundamentally tell us about the sheer, potent power of story itself? Or perhaps, what does it reveal about our own persistent human need for intellect, clarity, and justice in a world that so often feels fragmented and mysterious?